There's no Dear
Good.
Dr. Lisle. It just starts out saying, Doug talks about genes and behavior, but he makes some fundamental mistakes. First, genes are not distributed over architecture of the body and the brain. That's utter nonsense. This is this is completely, it's misspelled. So this is completely ignorant about developmental biology and molecular biology. Cells differentiate by activating and deactivating genes and certain developmental stages, which means all cells all over the body use most genes along their development. All of his talk about genes completely ignores epigenetics. It's obvious he is not educated in molecular biology. This is the main problem in evolutionary psychology. It so often is ignorant about biology. I completely support the notion that our behavior are strategies to survive and reproduce, and that evolution is a strong force. But I don't accept his oversimplistic explanations about evolutionary biology and psychology.
All right, this is a thing of beauty. All right, let's. I can't remember it all, but let's first of all let's talk about saying that the main problem in evolutionary psychology is so often ignorant about biology. Evolutionary psychology can't be ignorant about biology. Evolutionary psychologists might be ignorant about biology. But evolutionary psychologists, the foundation of evolutionary psychology comes from the most brilliant biologists in the 20th century and the 19th century. So evolutionary psychology was born in the mind of Charles Darwin, who is obviously the greatest mind in biology in the 19th century. Then evolutionary psychology was reborn and re-understood as a result of the work in evolutionary biology, particularly people like Sir Ronald Fisher, and then William Hamilton, George Williams, Richard Dawkins, Edward O. Wilson, Robert Trivers. Then finally we get to the first psychologist that actually grasps this and publishes in the area is going to be Lisle Cosmides. So to think that evolutionary psychology or evolutionary psychologists are theorizing ignorantly about biology is utterly absurd. Okay, so we could just discuss.
Would you say it's
that.
completely absurd?
It's completely absurd. All right, so now let's try to see what this listener is trying to say, because it is true that a given evolutionary psychologist may not know much about biology, and that it would be true if you were talking about me. I know almost nothing about biology. Now, that being said, you don't need to know anything about biology, you don't need to know anything about string theory and physics to be the best bridge builder in the world. Okay, it's a different level of analysis. So, I couldn't, if you gave me a microscope and said, tell me what the cytoplasm is versus the mitochondria versus the nuclear DNA, I might be able to guess on a multiple choice exam, but I wouldn't know, but neither do I care. So when I discuss things like the epigenetics or the non-epigenetic factors with respect to the development and embryology of a human, I am not ignorant about this. And so even the talk of epigenetics gets me riled up, because I know there's a vast ignorance and essentially a BS program that is coming behind that, which is that you can turn your kid into anything, including an alligator. Okay, so the notion is that your average child can be above average, and your above average child can be brilliant. Your brilliant kid can be a genius. This is not true. Okay, you can't even do something simple like you might want to turn your kid from straight to gay. Sorry, can't do it. Can't be done. So and you can't even turn a shy kid into an average kid when it comes to their sociability. So the notion of epigenetics bristles me, because it sticks its head into the sand with respect to the extraordinary evidence that's been collected with respect to behavior genetics. Now, the behavior genetics I do know. I don't know a damn thing about how the genes work on a technical level, and I don't need to. All I need to know is to be able to compute a correlation coefficient between identical twins raised together, raised apart, separated at birth, not separated at birth, etc. That's all that is. Okay? I don't have to know anything about the details. So I can build the Eiffel Tower before Einstein's ever born, and we don't know anything about Bohr's atom or anything else. So that's why this kind of criticism is just nonsense. So I try to figure out what else our guy said. So now, do I completely ignore and am I simplistic about the, quote, factors of epigenetics? Let's quickly cover what we mean by epigenetics. What we're really talking about here, folks, is the reaction range. What kinds of impacts can environmental inputs have on the genetic code such that it changes the nature of the organism? So, for example, and the reaction range is all important here. So, for example, if you are a light-skinned person from, I don't know, Scandinavia, the question is, how dark can your skin get? In other words, if we subject your skin to a whole bunch of sunlight, how dark can it get? If we measure that, and then how light would it get if we take the sun away? There's a range of the skin tone. That's going to be called your reaction range. The same thing is true with respect to all kinds of things. So, for example, how strong can an individual get? Well, there's a reaction range. So one individual starts lifting weights and they can become much stronger than they are. Another individual starts lifting weights and they cannot become much stronger. The reason is that they have differences in their genes. And the differences in their genes will constrain the effects. Okay? So I think we can see clearly how vast the reaction ranges are, for example, with respect to, I don't know, take any physical parameter. Take a pair of identical twins and find out what they look like when they're 20. And you're going to find that they're extremely similar in where they look. Doesn't matter where they were raised. They're almost exactly the same height. Okay? They're almost exactly the same weight. They're exactly the same body structure. They have extraordinarily similar intelligence. They have extraordinarily similar personalities. Now, are there some differences? Yes. Are those differences due to, quote, epigenetic factors that took place interacting on the genetic code throughout the development of the organism? Perhaps, but probably most of that variance took place early, and it might even be in the genetic code itself. So the notion that I've got a simplistic view of this is not a fair criticism. The fact that I do not know a great deal about molecular biology is a fair criticism, but it's not a fair criticism of evolutionary psychology or a theoretician in evolutionary psychology like myself. Okay? I don't need to know how the clock works in order to tell time. And that's the objection that this person who's probably knows vastly more than I know obviously does about cell mitochondria and messenger RNA and all kinds of stuff, but it's not relevant. Okay? What's relevant is, can I read a graph of a correlation coefficient on studies of monozygotic twins raised apart? Yes, I can. Okay? And so can anybody else of moderate level intelligence. It doesn't take a lot of brains to follow the data when it comes to what it is that I'm talking about. It took a lot of brains to figure out that that's what we needed to do, and it took brilliant brains like Sir Ronald Fisher's to figure out, and Carl Pearson's, how to figure out how to calculate these things in statistics. Okay? But no, from the theorizing that I'm doing here is actually fairly status quo with respect to evolutionary psychology, which sits on an extraordinary bed of concealed information in the theory of evolution. All right. That's my case. Time for us to move on.
All right. Fair enough. And I wanted to ask you if, have you heard, what are some of the most fair criticisms of evolutionary psychology?
I don't know that I've ever heard a fair criticism of evolutionary psychology. Now, you could take a given theory in evolutionary psychology and a given idea and say, okay, I don't think that fits. I don't think it's right. And you could say, okay, well now we're going to have to go through a process of looking at alternative explanations. And the person who did most to try to help scientists learn how to think clearly about evolutionary psychology was the evolutionary biologist George Williams, and who I believe was at Stony Brook. And so Williams was coming along right along a little bit after Hamilton, and these guys were the big dogs in terms of trying to help everybody understand how to properly formulate their theories and try to maneuver themselves into a place where they could have testable hypotheses. So any given idea certainly can be looked at and say, well, now wait a second. Just because that's a good story doesn't mean it's true, and that's correct. And so Tooby and Cosvides come along later and explain, a la Williams, that what you have to find is you have to find evidence of design. So you have to find evidence that there has clearly been a selection pressure that has led to the selection of genes building a specific circuit that's going to behave in a certain way under certain conditions that look like it is highly plausible that is subject to increasing the likelihood of gene survival. So there's a fairly sophisticated way of learning and thinking about this, and it's correct. This individual, and they're saying that there's criticisms of evolutionary thinkers. Of course there are, and even sophisticated evolutionary thinkers can sometimes make leaps, and hopefully they know when they're making leaps, and I think they usually do. People that are not well educated in evolutionary biology, if they haven't read, for example, and mastered the materials in The Blind Watchmaker by Dawkins, for example, then they can make leaps about what they think looks plausible and it's not plausible. Okay, so that's okay. That's fair. And I make leaps often where I know that I'm on thin ice, but it's plausible. And that doesn't mean that I've proven that there's evidence of a design that it's actually part of human nature, but I believe that it is. So let me give you an example of a speculation of mine, and that was actually pointed out to me by a good friend of mine that was picking up her kids from school, and she noted how much screaming there was on the playground, and it got her to thinking, and we started talking about it. And the curiosity was, why are kids freaking screaming on the playground? And it turns out that junior high school students won't do that. The young kids will. And then I went and listened on a playground. And what was interesting was to hear the shrieks and then quickly turn into laughter. And when you look at that, and it's happening over and over again, and it wasn't just the grade school that I sat outside and listened. It's every grade school. They all sound like that. So that's what a 7-year-old does. And that isn't an accident. The fact that it's happening at those ages and then it doesn't happen anymore, this looks like a, pardon the expression, developmental biological process. This is developmental embryology of the human. I have no idea what's taking place at the microbiological level to make this happen, but it's clearly happening. And so this thing settles down as it gets to be older and doesn't make those kinds of shrieks. Why would it do it then? It would seem that it would be very vulnerable to be making shrieks and alert predators. But the truth is, it's not that far from its mother. And so if its mother, when it's 7 years old, its mom better not be very far away from it. And so as the moms are picking berries and the kids are shrieking, that shrieking sends a false alarm, so the mom has to glance over and check and make sure it's not a predator. That 1 second later, the kid erupts in laughter and the mom can relax. So you can see that the mom and the kid have a conflict of interest over the mom's attention. The mom's wanting to pick berries and gossip with her friends about what's going on in the village sexual dynamics, whereas the kid wants mom to actually have the eyes of the mom on the kid all the time. That's in the kid's best interest. That would be maximum protection for the kid. So what the kid will do is run around with its friends and make periodic shrieks that will draw the mom's constant attention, continually pulling attention away from her other matters, and thereby increasing the safety of that organism. So we would expect that that what would happen is that there would be an evolutionary algorithm for the mom to the false alarms are making her actually draw attention away from things that might be in her personal genetic best interest, but the expense is too high to not go ahead and check. So false alarm after false alarm after false alarm, it's too bad. Mom is stuck with that as a problem, and the kid has the upper hand in that problem because the kid represents such a phenomenal investment that the mom can't afford to lose it. So even though only half of her genes in there, to the kid, 100% of its genes is located inside of itself. So it doesn't matter how much effort and energy it draws away from mom, as long as it's directed towards itself and not some other figuring out who to sleep with in the village and thereby get a little brother or sister. That's not necessarily in our kid's best interest. So this makes sense. Now, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has made this analysis. So this is an example of a sophisticated theoretical analysis of the evolution of a specific neural circuit for humans. I believe that is exactly how this works, and this is precisely how it took place in evolution. Now, some doctoral student at the University of Michigan someday may prove it, okay? They may prove it through specific design, developmental stage analysis, risk analysis of predators, likelihood of being eaten at different stages of development. As soon as they get to be as big and strong and athletic as mom, they quit doing it because it's no longer in their best interest to draw attention to predators, and they're too far away from mom and everything else under the sun. And mom's not that valuable. So there's going to be a CV that is sifting through Hamilton's rule as it finds its way into the genetic code of a human and therefore its behavioral propensities. So that's how that's going to work. Is it correct? I don't know. I think it looks really good to me, and I would be willing to bet on it. There's other things that we're going to come up with that aren't nearly as compelling and are flakier and more speculative and may wind up being partially correct and wind up having to be modified by a more sophisticated and more complete analysis. That's how we get more knowledgeable, is through this kind of essentially guided investigation. The advantage of evolutionary psychology over every other perspective in psychology, all of which have been fundamentally wrong, is because evolutionary psychology is consilient with biology. In other words, it's using the principles of biology to guide its thinking, guide its theoretical advances. And so this better theory leads you to looking. This is like in the famous scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They're looking in the wrong place. Okay, evolutionary psychology is looking in the right place, and therefore it has been extraordinarily successful as a lens from which to view human nature and to use empirical investigations. This is why you have books like the books you'll see by David Buss that are full of data and full of spectacular, cohesive analyses of problems that don't look anything like the Psych 101 texts of 30 years ago, because they march through both a theoretical with a beautiful theoretical and empirical integration that has never been seen before in social science.
Yeah, and this is,
all right.
I love your approach so much because not only do you have all the information, but you're combining all your clinical experience. So it's, one of these days we'll be able to read in a parenting magazine what you just described about kids shrieking at the playground. And I can just imagine what the editors of that magazine are going to think.
And it would be a really good little article for Psychology Today. That's who should publish that thing. And but who knows? It'll 25 years from now that people will shrug their shoulders and they'll say, of course. And or maybe it might be 50 years. Who knows, Nate? We'll see.
I can just imagine
all
the
right,
title.
let's go on.
Is your toddler preventing you from having an extramarital affair? Or some other clickbait type article.
That's it. That is the title. You got it.
All right. Our next question. All right. I think we've got that question under control. Okay. So our next question is about stress and anxiety. So Dr. Lisle, you mentioned that if stress and anxiety have a deleterious effect on health, they are very small. I hope so, but it honestly doesn't feel like it. I go to university and I get the biggest bouts of anxiety when doing a group project or presentation, essentially when I'm the center of attention. I have trouble sleeping the day before, and then I urinate and defecate all morning, and after the actual event, my bowels often seriously hurt and feel like they're tied in a knot, even if I didn't feel at all bad during the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I have tried to, quote, drain the adrenaline, as you've said, by running in place, but it seems to return too quickly. Should I just repeat and repeat? And can I get better sleep if I do it before bed?
Yeah, you're not doing yourself any damage. You could put up with adrenaline upon adrenaline upon adrenaline upon adrenaline. It's not going to do any damage. The fact that you just about rather die than give a presentation doesn't mean it's doing you any damage. It's just telling you that the status loss that you face could be considerable. So if you make a fool of yourself in front of the village, you could damage your mating prospects forever because there's only 30 people in the village anyway. So if you get in front of that village and you're supposed to be intelligent and have something clever or interesting to say and you don't do it, then it's going to turn out that could knock you down from being the sixth most attractive human in your gender to the seventh. And that could be a very big deal. So as a result of that, your anxiety is warning you, you better stay up late and be thinking about this thing over and over and over and over and over again, because we want you to be as prepared as possible. Otherwise, you're going to lose status. Now, what do you do about this? Well, hopefully you don't make a living doing this. Because this person has tremendous performance anxiety, and they may get over it or they may not. And certainly with practice, you have to. This is what Toastmasters is for, and that sort of thing, so that you can make many presentations and you can start to habituate to the stress that's involved here. You need to find out that you don't lose that much status if you don't do that good of a job. But if you only do it 4 times in your lifetime, you never learn that lesson. Now, in terms of draining off the adrenaline, yes, the idea is to repeat and repeat and repeat. Just constantly be flexing your muscles, essentially tiring them out. This will drain the adrenaline off for maybe just a few seconds. So when you walk up to do your presentation, you're likely to be, somewhat less stressed or potentially significantly less incapacitated than you were if you did not do this. Now, so that's how it's going to work. So you're going to defecate, you're going to urinate, and you're going to sweat, and you're going to stay up late, and that's what's going to happen when you have a great deal on the line and you've got a hyperconscientious nervous system that has not yet had enough experience at doing these things and finding out that you're overestimating the worst case scenario. So, people don't like these things, and most people overestimate the worst case scenario, but some people, by virtue of their genetics, they overestimate the worst case scenario a great deal more. And as a result, this is very hard on them. And I don't think that this is fair. I don't think that this should be part of college. I had a good friend of mine who had to finally face a speech class because it was, quote, necessary to graduate from our university. And she kept dropping the class because she essentially had a panic disorder developing as a result of this and had big-time speech anxiety. Eventually, she took a beta blocker in order to get through her one or two speeches. She also took a beta blocker on the day she was married in order to reduce her anxiety. So the use of some medication like that for someone who's only going to do this a few times in a lifetime is a perfectly responsible use of something like that, Inderol or some of their beta blocker like that. All right.
One of my favorite comedians, Mitch Hedberg, actually had this type of anxiety. And so he used to actually wear darker glasses when he'd get up a stage and close his eyes while he would do his entire bit so that he couldn't see the audience.
Oh my. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Unfortunately,
that's a
the
great
drugs
story.
he did caused him to overdose and he ended up dying. But that was Yeah,
Oh, well.
unfortunately. But
Yeah.
all right. So
All right.
yeah, so Dr. Love, this was a little different than the previous question, maybe a few episodes ago, where you said if you're that nervous, then why are you there? And this was, I guess, a question
Right.
about drinking alcohol when you're around friends or around
Right.
certain social situations. So in this
Correct.
case, you have to do it. So
Yeah.
you really don't have a choice. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So we Mickey Mouse our way around it as best we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So our next question is about dating. Now, this is a multi-part question, so we're going to take it. And Dr. Lyle, just interrupt me as you need to if the questions get too great.
Sure.
All right, dear Dr. Lyle, I'm a below average height male, but above the average height of females. A few days ago, I decided to do an informal experiment and count how many women that walk past me are above or below my height. And I was shocked to discover that most girls at my college stood taller. My confusion was replaced by outrage and shame as I realized that they were all wearing either high-heeled shoes or shoes with massive gel padding. And I began to compare it to my pathetically thin soles. I've heard of some research that while women prefer taller men because it's a sign of gene quality, men prefer shorter women because it's a sign of youthfulness. If that's true, why are they wearing shoes that make them appear taller if it makes them less attractive? Could it be that they do it so they have a better vantage point to see which male is taller? I've also read somewhere that the more practice one does at some skill, the less their IQ matters. Given that a lot of male behavior is a signal of intelligence, such as fashion, humor, arts, etc., could it be that females are more interested in them in order to better judge males? And the
All
final
right.
question
Hold
would
on.
be, okay.
Let's take these one at a time so I can't. We'll circle back so I can remember things. Okay. So let's look at the short thing first. The first of all, men do not prefer shorter women. So wherever they read this, they either read something that was incorrect or they misread what they read. So men prefer women to be shorter than themselves. They do not prefer short women. Okay, so men would prefer women to be, I believe, 4 inches to 5 inches shorter than they are. Women would prefer men to be 6 inches taller than they are. I think it winds up being an evolutionary compromise. I think men would prefer there to be a 4-inch difference. Women would prefer a 6-inch difference, and you wind up at 5. Okay, so those are the national averages, at least in the United States. Now, the fact that women are wearing heels is interesting. Now, there's different reasons for this. So one of the reasons for this is because if you wear heels, it changes your gait. It causes a lordosis-like posture as for the female, and as a result, it makes her movement more effeminate, and the more effeminate movement is judged by males to be more attractive. So, we know this from point light experiments that were done probably 15 years ago. So it could also be the case that that some women, if they are shorter, for example, if they're 5'2", and they put on a 3-inch heel, now they're 5'5", now they're more attractive than they would be at 5'2". So that's a possibility. But the typical male, I think it's around 5'9" or 5'10", and that individual is most attracted to a female who on average is 5'4". That's the 5 or 6 inch delta that appears to be consistent with the way the species works. So the 5'10" male is actually not more attracted to a 5'9" a 5'4" female who's got a 4-inch heel and is at 5'8", damn near looking him in the eye. That is not something he's interested in. But he would be interested in that if it increases the sachet of her walk and makes that more sexually attractive. Now, now one of the things that this person is bringing up is a notion of an egocentric bias, which is that is it possible that the female is thinking that if she's taller, that makes her more attractive because males who are taller are more attractive. That's a very interesting idea, and it has possible merit. I have certainly run into females who are a little bit intimidated by females who are taller than they are, and it makes them feel like they are sort of outclassed, which is interesting, and it is incorrect. So so I don't know. Maybe it's also the case that if you're a 5'4" female and you put on a 3-inch heel and it makes you 5'7", it now makes you more marketable to a male who instead of being 5'10" is 6'1". Okay, so it closes the delta, and you might actually be more attracted to somebody who's even more attractive than a 6-inch delta. And so as a result, that could be a marketing strategy because the taller the male is on average, just all things being equal, the more attractive they are. So females typically are aiming at the 80th plus percentile or so for male height. So the average female would actually prefer a male who's at the 80th percentile for height. So that actually makes sense. I never quite thought that through before. So that's probably another deal. So we've got a possible egocentric bias. We also have a possible a market stretcher for the female. It gets her to stretch into the taller echelons of males. And it also makes their walk sexier. So there's a lot of reasons why that might be taking place, but the male does not prefer shorter women. That is all things being equal. That's not how that works. Okay.
Dr. Lisle, you had mentioned how they found out that women have a sexier walk when they have high heels. You said is the point light something? Can you go over that a little bit in more detail?
Right. So what that is if you put a little light on like a band, a little thing that like a wristband, and you stick a light on it and you put it on the joints of a person. So for example, if you were to put a little like a sweatband and you stick a light on it, sew a light on there, a little point of a little light, a little white light, and you stick it on somebody's elbow, and then you put it on their knees, and you put it on their ankles, and then you have it wear a little thing around their hips. So you got a couple of lights on both sides of the hips and the shoulders, etc. And so then what you do is you have that person walk towards a camera in the dark. So so what you're watching is you're watching the movement of the skeleton. And if you watch the movement of the skeleton, if the female is in high heels, the movement is judged by men who are doing nothing other than watching lights move. The men will judge it as significantly sexier.
Wow.
Okay? So that's how that works. So that's because it's changing the posture, and it's accentuating the female sway in her hips, and the female sway in her hips is a indicator of fitness, of fertility for a human female. So males are built by nature to pick up that movement from 500 yards away. So they can see way across the African savanna. They look over there and it's like, aha, that's a female. Okay? And she's not pregnant, because when females are pregnant, they lose that sway because of the excess weight. It changes their gait considerably. So even a little bit of excess weight actually can change a female's gait. So even 5 or 10 pounds can make a difference in that gait. So that's how this was discovered. These were the point light experiments. They were done, I think, in the early 2000s, maybe even before, but Yeah, that's where they figured this out. That's where they
Fascinating.
figured out why high heels were sexy. There was all this
Does it?
bullshit psychodynamic stuff about how high heels made a female off balance and it made her vulnerable, therefore she could be taken sexually. This is all complete bullshit. Okay, has nothing to do with it. It has to do with postural changes, gait changes, and accentuating fitness indicators. Um, Essentially turning the female gait into a supernormal stimulus that gets picked up by the male and just considered sexy. So that's what it is.
Absolutely fascinating. So, and Dr. Lisle, I often wonder too if the type of women who would wear high heels are those who are on the higher end of the bell curve, meaning that they may prefer men who are maybe 6 or 7 or 8 inches higher than they are. So they're trying to attract them.
Who knows? That's now that is an example. That's a perfect example of what we were just talking about earlier tonight. That is good evolutionary speculation. That in fact, females that would be interested in facing the harrowing problem of wearing a high heel could be a female who because she is above the mean for sexual attractiveness, wants to, feels like she can compete for super high end males, and the super high end males are going to tend to be significantly taller than their peers. She may only be 5'4", but by God, she may be able to land a 6'3" Amazon if she sticks some heels on. That is a totally legitimate speculation, and how one would go about ferreting that thing out and making the point, I can't figure it out right now. But that's a fine doctoral dissertation, Nathan. Good job.
Cool. Well, maybe
right.
someday, right? Okay, so we're
All right. What else we
we're
got
going
going?
to finish this question, and then we've got a caller on hold who's been patiently waiting. So we're going to take this last couple of questions in this
Sure.
actual question. So Dr. Lisle, my final question would be: do males and females confuse themselves by imagining that the opposite sex is attracted to qualities in them that they seek in their partners? That's what you were saying earlier. For example, a male that goes to the gym to become really buff might believe that physical fitness is all that matters because that's mostly what he cares about. Are they intuitively in touch with opposite sex psychology and only rationally confused?
This person is aiming around some interesting questions. And that is, I believe the answer to this question is going to be twofold. I believe that we naturally have embedded intuition to some degree about what the opposite sex is interested in. And I believe that we are also sometimes, we do not have such intuition and we're left to our own devices to figure it out. And sometimes then the egocentric bias, which is, in other words, all we have to go on is what we are thinking. And when that is true, it can lead us astray. So let me give you an example. There are females that may work very hard at getting themselves muscular and fit, and they may believe that males find this attractive, and males do not. Okay, so this is an interesting potential egocentric bias that's driving this. So they may be very attracted to males that are very muscular and fit, and yet they're thinking that this is something that they need to do. So I believe that there can be a lack of intuition there about that. In other words, you're born with a chip inside your head if you're a female to be attracted to muscles, but when it comes to you speculating on how to get yourself more competitive, you may make a mistake here. Okay, so I think one of the interesting things that you'll see in the world in the last 20 or 30 years has been this fascination with female hyperfitness competitors, where essentially you have to be showing a six-pack set of abs in order to be competitive. This is insanity. It is. People can compete and do whatever they want. They can play chess, play hockey, play basketball. I don't know, argue about how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. But to be judged as more fit because your body fat content is so low that you can see your abs as you strut around in a bikini, this is not attractive to males. And the fact is that if some males may find it attractive, but some males find women that are 400 pounds attractive. So this is the bizarre ends of the bell curve here. The truth is that males, when they see females that are extremely lean and showing their muscles because there's no fat to cover over the definitions, then it turns out that most males are very much turned off by this. And the reason why they're turned off by this is because it is indicative that the female is not fertile. And virtually in all cases, the female that looks like that is in fact not fertile. Okay, that's evidence of a female at the edge of starvation, and there's no way that she could bring a child to term. She is clearly struggling with respect to her health, and she's in a position where the body is fighting for its own survival just to get enough calories. And in no fashion is this worth, an orgasm. So however, but a female could think, because she so finds the males that look like that so appealing, with large muscles and large definitions, that she could be tripped by her egocentric bias into thinking that she's doing something marvelously competitive when in fact she's not. Okay. I had another case that came up. I had a fairly assertive female businesswoman that was taking a few too many risks, and called me, and we sort of talked it through, and she was on the verge of taking some significant risks, and I queried her as to why she was taking these risks. And as we moved down through the thinking, she was actually thinking that it would make her more sexually attractive, because she found it sexually attractive if men were successful and they had taken risks. And I told her, big mistake. Men will not find you more sexually attractive if you are successful and you have taken a bunch of risks. That's the last thing they're interested in. And so we actually caught her, on the verge of making a significant investment and a significant life change for all the wrong reasons, because she was using an egocentrically biased view of what it was going to take to make her more competitive. So that's so the question here, is pointing something out. Now, we do have a lot of intuition that is embedded into our genetic code in all probability about what the opposite sex finds attractive. I believe that we do. So, for example, how women know to sort of play with their hair is amazing. Like, who the hell taught them? And if it's cultural, how come it's everywhere on Earth in every culture that hasn't even been talking to each other and has no common ancestor for 60,000 years? The answer is genetic. Okay, so so you have some intuition about what the opposite sex would find attractive, and you didn't need to learn it. It's in the system. On the other hand, there are limitations to those insights, and when you start to hit limitations and you don't have an automated intuition, people will sometimes then default to their own vision, their own egocentric bias, and they will sometimes make mistakes behind the egocentric bias because that's what the egocentric bias does. It essentially says, look, I don't know what's in the other person's head, but my first approximation, my first guess is what's inside my head. And so sometimes if you use that and you cross over on a gender, you make a mistake. So that's how that works.
Fantastic. All right. So we have had a caller waiting here patiently, so we're going to take a call.
Okay.
All right. Anonymous, welcome to the show. Thanks for calling.
Hi. Thank you so much.
Hi there.
So my question for you...
Sure.
Good. My question for you is on weight loss and health, and I've been following the diet and the suggestions from you and Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. McDougall, et cetera. And I've lost quite a bit, but I think I'm already, I'm kind of slipping into some bad circuits or patterns or something. I think I would fall in that hyperconscientious nutcase category that you describe. And I've reached a point where it's like I can't help but think about losing weight. Everything, like I'm so hyper focused on it, even to the point where now I'm taking healthy things and probably making them unhealthy by, can I cram in as much exercise as possible? Can I restrict my calories, even though I know in every lecture you say you don't need to, but can I restrict more and more and more? How do you, if you don't have that moderation gene, which I clearly don't, how do you keep this from getting back into unhealthy patterns?
Well, we're going to back up for just a second, and we're going to try to understand this, and then I'll give you the general direction of how it is that we deal with the problem. So, all behavior is emanating from cost-benefit analysis. So you're running a cost-benefit analysis on, whether or not you should measure your apple and whether or not you should go out and run around the block again to burn off a few more calories. So everything you're doing is coming behind cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefit analysis that's at the end of it it sounds like there's a great deal of consternation about having excess fat stores on you, okay? So you're worried about this, and you're worried about its impact and sort of what other people will think of you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where the hyperconscientious psychology meets the 20th and 21st century with respect to the pleasure trap, and then people wind up, with excess weight on them. It is socially costly, which means it's very costly with respect to any kind of evolutionary analysis that your brain is doing, and therefore this becomes pretty important. So, first of all, what's your age?
I'm 33.
33, okay. Any married, any kids, anything like that?
Married, one child. And I've already got below my initial goal weight. So now some of the unhealthier thought patterns I'm thinner now than I've been since high school, but I still, I'm focused on this more than ever.
Right. So hold on a second. Let's just do a little bit. So when you were in high school, what was your sort of height and weight?
5'6", and I probably was somewhere in the 160s. Now I went from 209 about a year and a half ago down to 151 right now.
Okay, so now you're down to 151. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so we can see that at 209, there was very significant social costs. Okay, I don't think that we could possibly see it otherwise. In other words, that's a pretty significant burden to be carrying. Not in terms of the fat. If you're young and spry and athletic enough, that's not the problem. But the problem is that you are aware what it costs you socially. In other words, people are calculating this, and you look like normal America, but the truth is that you're a long ways from looking and being as fit as you could be. So now in the last year or two, you've lost a great deal of that weight. Okay, so you're now much more fit, and it's been a major success. However, your mind is well aware that we're not that far away, that our behavior isn't that far away, and that we've got the propensity to easily be back at 209. So you're living with the worst case scenario peeking over your shoulder, whispering in your ear, saying, "Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out." Okay? So I'm not really surprised that you're pretty anxious about this and pretty vigilant. So I would, and so you say you can't help but think about losing weight, and that you're still thinking about, doing a lot of exercise and restricting calories. This makes sense that you're still in the middle of this, trying to figure out the parameters and try to get a sense of just how vigilant you need to be. This is like a person who was a C student and has become an A student, and they don't know how hard they need to work to maintain an A. They really don't have a feel for it. And so you're kind of in a, I'm not going to give you any sort of magic sauce tonight, because the truth is that you're in a process now. Your mind has to learn through its process, just how vigilant you need to be. And you will be experimenting at different levels of vigilance, say, over the next year, and you'll get a feel for what it is that you're up against. So unbeknownst to you, what's happening is in the deep recesses of your brain, you're running a cost-benefit analysis on all these options. And so has it felt, for example, worth it to you to get down to 151 pounds?
Absolutely. But as soon as I did, I wanted to lose more.
Got it. Okay. And the truth is, at sort of 5'6" and 151, do you still see excess fat stores on your body that would make you more fit if you were to lose it?
Yeah, mostly post-pregnancy related kind of tummy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So you can still see this, and it's still rattling around in your skull. You're not yet down to where a Stone Age female would be. Okay. So I'm not surprised that the mind is still working on these problems, and it also knows how difficult it is, and that you have to resist what your natural instincts would want you to do, which is to eat the richest food in the environment. So you're fighting the pleasure trap, and you just don't know how hard the fight is yet. So, everything that I'm hearing from you is completely and utterly rational and makes complete sense. And really, the only people that wind up having any long-term success with fighting the pleasure trap are people that are the hyper-conscientious nutcases. That's pretty much who winds up with success. So the good news is that you've got the wackadoodle personality to make this possible. The bad news is that I can't wipe it away, and nor would we necessarily want us to. Okay. Now, what will happen is that with continued success here, you don't know it's kind of like if you're winning in a race, if you're a jockey on a horse and you're in a hell of a race, and let's suppose you're so darn focused and there's so much mud and it's a mess out there, you don't even dare look to the left or right to find out whether or not anybody's close. You just keep going as hard as you can. That's all you can do. Okay. And that's a little bit where you are right now. You're going kind of as hard as you can in one direction because you're not sure, what the competitor looks like. The competitor is the pleasure trap that's out there to get you, and it's an omnipresent force, and you are a newbie with respect to its mastery. So you're not comfortable yet about whether or not you can loosen the screws on this whole thing and wind up being fine. Okay? So it could be that what it took to dive the weight down to the level that you have it now may not be what it takes to maintain it. You may not have to be nearly this strict. There's a different process with respect to losing as opposed to stabilizing. So you may continue to lose for a while, and then somewhere out there you may decide, you know what? Maybe I don't want to be this vigilant. And when you stop that vigilance, we may find you drift up a little bit, and then you sit at some equilibrium that seems like a reasonable compromise at 143 or whatever the heck it is, or 148, or who knows. But the point is that where you are now is you are in the middle of an odyssey, that you have now learned that you do not need to live your life as a 200-plus pound woman. You don't need to do it. You wouldn't have been sure of this, and you wouldn't have been sure how reasonably comfortable it could be to get there. Okay? If you're a conventional eater, the only way they're going to get there is through crash dieting, some ketogenic crazy crap, and just basically making your life a chaos. So you don't need to do that if you're eating a diet of low caloric density with a lot of whole natural plant food. So if you've found the right direction, and now it's just going to be a matter of discovering what the parameters are for you and finding for yourself something that fits well. Okay. So the fact that you're still tied and twisted up about this doesn't bother me. This is part of the nature of the odyssey that you're in. So talk to me in a few months if it turns out that you're not finding any inner peace, and that you don't know how to let go of something that is keeping you in a spin. But right now, the spin that you're in makes sense to me, so we just let it spin for a while.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much for the answer and the feedback.
Very good. My pleasure. Good luck with all. Say hi anytime.
Thank you.